Greetings, greetings. This is Joe Green, and here to share a couple of thoughts with you, and a couple of things I want to talk about today. And the first one is, um, it's unfortunate, especially people in the Black community, um, that we have been so triggered by things, and we're so manipulated by the press that we end up fighting on behalf of the things that are meant to destroy us or things that aren't in our best interest. And what am I talking about? So there was this big controversy about the 14th Amendment recently in the Supreme Court. I think, I don't think, but the Supreme Court actually made a ruling on it recently. And for those of you who may or may not know, that the 14th Amendment is called is based on birthright citizenship. And why is that so important? We know that as a nation, there was a time in this country that slavery was legal. Now, let me take you back a little bit. So in 1619, when the British colonies were formed, started in Virginia, and so in July of 1619, Virginia had their first congressional meeting, right? And that's considered the founding of America because that's the British colonies. Now, before Virginia, and before 1619, there were other nations that came and had colonies here. For instance, Portugal, Spain, France, and some other places. But the reason that we don't count those colonies because we know that the British colonies were the colonies that eventually formed America. And so America was formed uh, based on the British colonies, which is why 1619 is the date that we look at. Right. So initially, slavery was indentured servitude, which means that you came over here, and in order to pay your fare, you had to go into indentured servitude. Right. And so most people, it's like 5 to 7 years, you'd be you'd be working as a servant, and then you would be able to get your freedom. And so later on in the 1600s, the institution of chattel slavery came into play. Now, what chattel slavery means is instead of being a servant that was temporary, you became permanent property, right? That's what the word chattel means. And so, interesting enough, that the first person who was a slave owner, when chattel slavery went into effect, and actually the person who initiated the whole law of chattel slavery was a black man by the name of Anthony Thompson. He owned a black slave, and he went to court and he got permanent custody of that person as a slave. And so moving forward, what happened was not only was slavery legal and slaves were considered property at the time, but more importantly, if it's a female slave and you own the female slave, then all of her children also became property of the slave master. And so that was an important thing to look at because of the fact that if you were born to a female slave, you were also considered property of the slave master, and you could be sold, you could be done whatever to. And of course, we know that this is a horrible institution. And not only was it a horrible institution, it's one of the oldest institutions in human history. Slavery has existed from the beginning of time and still exists in certain parts of the world. And so what America did is America didn't create it, America inherited it, right? And so the colonies that came over before the formation of the country allowed for slavery to occur. And so then we have the formation of the country. And of course, this is the 250-year anniversary, July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence was created or written into law. And so because of that, we became a nation. And so from 1619 to 1776, slavery existed. Now, from 1776 and then in 1865, with the Emancipation Proclamation in, 1863, I should say, the Emancipation Proclamation made it illegal to own people as slaves, right? And so the 13th Amendment made it illegal servitude or involuntary servitude illegal, except for, and they put a caveat in there in case you committed a crime and you got incarcerated, and that was a different thing. But anyway, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. So then what they had to do is they put the 14th Amendment into effect because by law, if you were born to a slave in this continent, in this country, then you were a slave as well. So what the 14th Amendment did was give you birthright citizenship, which meant that if you were born in America, then you were automatically a citizen of America. right? And so that was directed specifically for Black slaves, right? So the reason I'm bringing that up is because we as Black people now, because of TDS, and you guys know what TDS is, and some other triggers that we've had that we haven't dealt with, we now uh, are on the wrong side of the issue because birthright citizenship was never meant to be extended towards people that came into the country illegally. It was specifically directed at African or descendants of African slaves, right? And so the reason I'm saying that is because we know that our forefathers, those who were enslaved, fought hard and long, along with the side of the abolitionists and other people that weren't down with slavery, fought hard to get full citizenship for those who were descendants of slaves, right? It was never meant to be extended towards illegal immigrants, illegal aliens. And so we as Black people should be a little bit offended by the fact that they're taking the law that was meant to free our ancestors and taking it and using it for someone who may come over here illegally. And I've seen it firsthand. I was in the United States Navy, and during the migration of a lot of people from Cuba in the 1990s and Haiti, there were people from Cuba literally, and I saw it firsthand. So I'm not talking about what I heard, what I know. A pregnant woman would come over here and try to make themselves have a baby if they got on a U.S. ship, which is considered U.S. property, or if they were able to set foot on a military base. So Cuba, Guantanamo Bay was American property, or if they got a chance to get here to the land, to the mainland, and have a baby, then that baby, which they called anchor babies, was considered a U.S. citizen. And so that birthright citizenship was used in a way that it wasn't originally meant to be used. And so again, I would say, if you are a person that you believe that your family was part of the slave trade, then you should also want that not to be extended in a way that it wasn't meant to. Because to me, it dishonors our ancestors, because our ancestors went through a lot to be able to get full citizenship. And so again, because we are not many times we are not looking at the issues from the historical perspective, the true historical perspective, and we're allowing emotions and what the mainstream media wants to tell us. We are taking the side, I would say, taking the wrong side of an issue that really is not in our best interest. And so that's a whole nother talk, but I wanted to get that out of the way because I see a lot of comments of people about the 14th Amendment, but they really don't understand that that was never meant for anything other than those who were descendants of slaves during the chattel slavery era in America. The second thing I want to talk about, and I think is an important distinction, I hear people say all the time, we live in a democracy. We live in a democracy. I need you to understand that we don't live in a democracy. We live in a representative republic that's ruled by the rule of law, that's governed by the rule of law. Now, why is that distinction so important? It's important because if you understand what a democracy is, democracy, I've heard it described as mob rule. Why do they call it mob rule? Because in a democracy, you only need 51% of the people to vote or support something, and it becomes law or goes into effect. Which means no matter what it is, if 51% agree on it, then it becomes law. But when you're in a representative republic that's governed by the rule of law, there's certain principles that our Constitution has outlined. And so that's how we are governed. And so if you want something changed, you have to get it signed into law, or you have to get the Constitution amended. And so that protects us because of the principles. And I'm going to say this all the time. You'll hear me say this all the time. We have to focus on the principles and not people, parties, and our emotions. We have to focus on the principles because our Constitution dictated certain principles, and those principles are the ones that sustained us throughout a lot of the things that we've gone through as a nation over the last 250 years. But see, because we're not looking at it from that perspective and understanding the principles and what the purpose of the principles was, we can very easily get distracted and get manipulated, right? Because this is not a democracy. I'm going to say that again. We live in a representative republic. And that's why things like the electoral college is important. That's why it's important to understand the population, because your representation is based on the amount of people that live in your particular area. And the electoral college is important as well because it gives equal, or not equal, completely equal, but somewhat levels the playing field. Because if you look in America right now, you probably have New York and California and maybe one other state. It's so many people in those states, and the perspective and the worldview of people from California and New York is very different from the people that live in rural America. So if you look throughout the country, outside of California and New York and maybe a couple of other metropolitan areas, their worldview is very different. And if we didn't have things like the Electoral College and a representative republic, then the majority of those people that live in rural America, that their perspective would just be completely ignored, because we know that people that live in Manhattan, New York, or Los Angeles, California, have a certain perspective and worldview that doesn't necessarily line up with those who live in the, in the heartland of America, as they call it. And so it's very important that we understand these type of things and how important it is. And the reason I say it's important for us to talk about these things is because if you don't understand things from a factual basis and a historical basis, it's very easy for them to manipulate and change the scenario. And so we live in a very critical time that it's going to be important for people to educate themselves, to know things from a historical background, and also look at it from a factual basis. I did a talk not long ago, and I was talking about socialism versus capitalism. And it's amazing to me to see how many people are defending socialism or communism or Marxism. It all stems from Marxism. But I need y'all to understand that Marxism is not the solution. Marxism puts the people in greater bondage than any other system. And we live in a capitalistic society, and it's ruled by free markets. And free markets and capitalism gives you the best opportunity for having a higher standard of living. Because I know people in America, I know firsthand, myself included, that we may have come from very humble and meager background, but if you make the right decisions, you work hard, and keep your nose to the grindstone, that you can accomplish a lot of things in this country that you can't accomplish anywhere else. I know a lot of people I'm in my late 50s, a lot of people that have made right choices, worked hard, and a lot of them are retired now, and they're living a very comfortable life, a very good life, especially compared to the rest of the world. And so we have to honor and recognize what we have so that we don't lose it. And we're being manipulated by the powers that be. And I need you to understand that most of the people that are behind the powers that be, that are pulling the strings, are the ones who are super wealthy and super powerful. And so they're not really affected by the issues that me and you are affected by. And if we're not careful, what happens is we will get tricked out of our position, as they say in the streets. You get played out of your position, and then you'll lose things that you didn't realize how important they were once you've lost them. But let me talk a little bit about this campaign that we started, this initiative. It's called Faith and Freedom 250. And we really started the last Sunday in June, and it's going to go all throughout September, up until September. And we're going to honor Constitution Day in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, I'm sorry. Constitution Day, which was the Constitution was signed into law September 17, 1787, right? And so we're going to be celebrating this year 250 years. And so I'm going to be bringing you messages that are centered around faith and freedom and how important it is for us to protect this republic that we have. So as America approaches the 250 year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I think that we're in a very important crossroads in history. We can go in different directions. And I will say to you, although the things are very critical and it seems like there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, it's the craziest it's been in my lifetime. But I need you to understand it's not as crazy. There's times in this country it's been even more crazy. If you look at during the Civil War, if you look at different times in history, that we've had some very critical things that have happened, some very tumultuous times. But because of this Constitution and the principles that the Constitution was written on, it allowed us to survive, in my estimation. And for 250 years, this republic has endured wars, depressions, assassinations, civil unrest, political divisions, international conflicts, and cultural revolutions. Empires have risen and fallen around us, yet the American experiment still endures and continues. And the question for us today is not merely how America was founded. The question is, can we preserve what we have inherited? And like I said before, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, even as a Black American or African American or whatever you want to call us. And I say whatever, I'm using air quotes because Black is really a social construct. And we know that we have a common language that we understand when we say when we mean Black, right? Blacks in America. And so being a person who is Black in America and understanding our history, I would say that although as a country we still have a ways to go, we've come so far in my lifetime at trying to equal and level the playing field. And I would say, without any fear of contradiction, that America, with all of its, checkered past, is still the best country in this world on this side of heaven. We know that the kingdom of heaven is the only perfect country, the only perfect nation, but we know in this side of the world, and I've traveled around the world, and there's a reason why there's people that's dying to try to get into this country because of this great republic that we have. And so we have to honor it and we have to be grateful for what we have, because if we lose it, things are going to be so much worse than you can ever imagine, especially if Marxism takes control in this country. And I know people that have come from, I have a friend who came from North Korea. I have a friend who came from China. I know a person who came from the Soviet Union and Cuba. And they will tell you that Marxism is not good at all. It's very oppressive for the people. And so we have to be careful not to fall for the okey doke, for the shenanigans and what they're trying to convince you that Marxism is a good thing, which it really isn't. So Benjamin Franklin was asked, as he exited the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, "What have you given us, doctor? A monarchy or a republic? What have you given us? A monarchy or republic?" And Benjamin Franklin's response was, "A republic if you can keep it." And those are very profound words, a republic if you can keep it. The statement may be the greatest challenge ever given to American people. Not a republic if politicians keep it, not a republic if judges keep it, not a republic if soldiers keep it, but a republic if the people can keep it. And you guys got to understand how much power you have as individuals, but you have to align yourselves with the right principles in order for this to be successful. And it's called the American experiment for a reason. And I think that the American experiment so far is doing really well. It's better, it's above average. And our founders understood something that many modern societies have forgotten. Freedom is not self-sustaining. Liberty has a maintenance cost. Freedom is not free. I want you to understand that freedom is not free. And so because we understand that freedom is not free, there's a cost for freedom. And there's a maintenance cost for freedom, right? You have to maintain it. Just because it was good years ago, you have to maintain it and stand on the principles that formed it. A republic does not collapse because enemies attack from the outside. Most republics collapse because citizens abandon the principles that it was built on. I'm going to say that again. Most republics and most empires, if you want to call the United States an empire, isn't destroyed from outside enemies. It's usually collapses because the citizens abandon the principles that built the republic. America was founded as a republic. The founders intentionally rejected a monarchy. They rejected the concentration of power in one individual, and they rejected tyranny. They rejected the ideal that rights come from government. And that's why in our Declaration of Independence and in our Bill of Rights, they recognize that our rights do not come from the government. It doesn't come from people. Our rights come from our Creator. And that's why it says we acknowledge that we have been endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Because our rights come from the Creator, government shouldn't be able to take away our rights. People can't take away our rights because what they didn't give you, they can't take away. And if the Creator gave you the rights that you have, then he's the only one that can take those rights away from you. The government doesn't grant those rights. Government recognizes and protects those rights. If government grants rights, government can remove rights. But if God gives us rights, no earthly authority can legitimately take them away. And so that's an important distinction. Because our rights come from the Creator, we can't allow people to take our rights away. And the other thing I want to mention to you is that because we recognize that our rights come from the Creator and we stand on the principles that align with His principles, we can sustain the republic even more than most people can imagine, right? And we have to recognize that. We have to look at what is happening around the world and what is happening around the country. And many people are willing to give up rights for convenience or ignore what's happening because of convenience and luxury, right? And we can't do that. We have to make sure that we are standing on those principles. And another thing I want you to realize is that our Constitution was meant to restrain government from interfering in your life, right? Certain rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution restrains the government from interceding and taking over, interfering with your life. And these framers understood monarchies. You think about the British Empire has a king and a queen, right? Some of these other European nations that people came from, they had monarchies. They had kings or queens that ruled over the people. And so they intentionally created the Constitution as a way to limit the rights of the government so it can't intercede on your ability to live a free and prosperous life. And the thing that the Constitution does is allows us to have choices. And as long as we make the right choices, we can have a peaceful and prosperous life. Um, the republic depends upon self-government. The founders repeatedly emphasized that political freedom depends on personal virtue. John Adams warned, our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. A moral and religious people. So if you look at our 10 commandments, the 10 commandments, the first 4 commandments govern religion by God, and the last 6 commandments govern morality. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, right? And so we have to understand that our government, our republic is based on a moral and religious people. That's what the framers recognize. And why is that so important? It's so important because in order to destroy the republic, one of the things that's happening is the powers that be are trying to erode our morality. They're trying to tear down our morality. They're trying to change what we believe to be moral and also our religious aspect, because human beings are created to worship a creator, right? Human beings are created to worship something bigger than themselves. And also without an outside force that we call God, right? There is absolutely no morality. Because if morality is based on your feelings, your opinion, or your perspective, then we all can outline our own morality. But morality has to come from an outside source, right? Which we call God. So God is the one who determines what's right and what's wrong. And if you look in Genesis chapter 3, right, Satan, the main way that he deceived human beings to be separated from God is he said that you don't have to listen to God. If you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you can be your own God and you can determine what's right and what's wrong, right? You don't have to listen to a guide. You can have your own morality, but you have to recognize that true morality only comes from our creator, right? An outside source that is greater than we are. The republic requires citizens capable of governing themselves before they can govern a nation. If people cannot govern their appetites, their emotions, their desires, and their ambitions, eventually they will demand the government govern every aspect of their lives instead. And that's what happens. That's why one of the things when we talk about Marxism that is creeping into our country is they did things like the sexual revolution. They promoted the idea that there should be no morality attached to sexuality, right? So you had the free love hippie movement. And what happens is when people don't govern their appetites, then eventually they're going to need the government to govern their lives. The less self-government we have internally, the more external government we require politically. I'm going to read that statement again. The less government we have internally, I don't know what happened. I was just blanked out for a second. The less government we have internally, the more external government we require politically. Even the Bible says the law is for the lawless, right? And so when you don't self-govern yourself, that's why you need government oversight. So for instance, the government should just operate as a referee. right? We should be able to play the game of life, and the government operates as a referee, which means when you break the rules, then the government gets involved, right? If I live at peace with my neighbors, I should never even have to worry about politicians or police or anything. But now, if I don't govern myself and I do something like break into my neighbor's house or steal something or get into a fight or attack my neighbor, then that's when the government comes in and interferes with our lives, right? And so when we self-govern ourselves, we don't need more government, we need less government. The Bible teaches us exactly the same principle. In the book of Proverbs, it says, "He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls." He that have no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Self-control is not merely a personal virtue, it's a civic virtue. A nation of disciplined citizens requires less control from government. A nation without discipline eventually exchanges liberty for security, because freedom requires virtue. John Adams also wrote, "Public virtue cannot exist without private virtue, and public virtue is the only foundation of republics." Now, what does that mean? That means that the foundation of America is not merely economics, it's not military power, political power. The foundation of a republic is virtue. And so that's why it's so important that we promote the idea of our faith, of Christianity, because the founding fathers understood that the principles of Judeo-Christianity was the foundation of our nation, which would not only help us to self-govern ourselves, but they're the principles that you can have a free and prosperous society. And so one of the things that they did, the Marxists did, and they understood after World War II, that in order for them to seize control and power over the Western world, which is Great Britain and the United States and the Western world, they had to tear down the institutions, the principles, right? That's why they invoked a whole bunch of stuff like the second wave feminist movement, the sexual revolution, the drug culture, and all these type of things, because they understood that the only way for them to come in, seize power, and control the people was to erode at the principles that this nation was built upon. And that most of us, our individual lives are governed by our religion, our faith in God, because the reason I can be a better person and not try to take advantage of you or not try to harm you in any way is not because I'm afraid of what a person may do, because if I feel like I have power over that person, then there would be nothing to restrain me from taking advantage of that other than my faith with Christ, right? So my faith in God, my faith in Christ says he governs my life. And because of that, I don't do things that I shouldn't do to other people, right? Love my neighbor as myself. And also I know that there are consequences that God gives us when we break his laws and his rules and mistreat people. The foundation of the republic is virtue, character, integrity, honesty, personal responsibility, courage, faithfulness, and sacrifice. And without these virtues, the Constitution is just a piece of paper. Samuel Adams issued a similar warning: "A general dissolution of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of America than the whole force of the common enemy." In other words, America is more likely to be destroyed by moral collapse than military conquest. That's why the morals of this country has been under attack. That's why the powers that be are trying to convince you that religion and faith in God is stupid. That's why they're trying to tell you that what we understand to be moral and true shouldn't be moral and true anymore. That's why they are promoting over sexualization in the Black community. They're promoting criminality. They're promoting drug use, right? They're promoting all these things through popular culture, through the music and through social media, and they're promoting bad behavior and disrespect, because those are virtues that we built upon, that when you invoke those type of bad behaviors, it actually helps to erode at the foundation of the country. And so what I want to say to you is liberty and responsibility are twins. Modern culture often speaks about rights, and the founders spoke equally about duties. They understood that liberty without responsibility becomes chaos, and rights without virtue become entitlement. Freedom without morality becomes a license. That means a license to do whatever you want to do. Benjamin Franklin stated, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom." And you guys know that for yourself. If you gave a person who has no morals complete freedom, they're not going to do good things to people. They're going to do really bad stuff, right? That's why we have jails and prisons and laws, because like I said, it operates as a referee to make sure people are playing within the confines of the game of life, right? They're staying within the lines, because once you go outside of the lines, there are repercussions that occur. And knowledge is also essential to liberty. James Madison wrote, knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power of knowledge that knowledge gives. Ignorant citizens cannot preserve free societies. A republic requires informed citizens, and citizens must understand history, and they must understand civics. And that's why I do a lot of teaching on it. And the thing that I think is so interesting is because all this stuff I'm saying is factual, whether it's the Bible, whether it's actual historical documentation, or whether it's just life experience. We know that there are a lot of people out there, if you didn't put restraints on it, if there wasn't a law, there's some people out there, the only reason they're not knocking old ladies over the head and taking all their money because they don't want to go to jail. Let's be honest with it. There's some people out there, the only reason they're not taking advantage of other people is because they're afraid of the consequences. But see, a moral and virtuous person is not going to take advantage of you because their morality dictates their actions. And so that is the understanding of what we have here. But we also have to educate ourselves. I was watching online the other day, and I've done social media, I've done YouTube, preaching, teaching, writing books for over 20 years. And the thing that's so interesting to me is I look on social media. I went on YouTube the other day, and I saw videos like there was a lady who's very curvy. I won't say her channel. And she makes these videos that she's on a treadmill wearing tights on, and the focus is on her back part, right? I looked at her videos. Her videos have like tens of millions of views, right? So she's going viral simply because of people staring at her backside. And then I look at people that are educating people, talking about moral issues, talking about historical issues, talking about things that edify people and educate them, and their views are very low. So it just goes to show, because I believe that the algorithm is attributing to that, because they don't want to have an informed people. They don't want to have a people that have a high moral value and virtue, because those people are less easy to control. And we understand finally the biblical foundation of freedom. Our founders were not all identical in theology. They held differing denominational beliefs, but most agreed upon a central truth. Human beings possess dignity because they are created by God. People need to be loved and respected simply because they're created in God's image. And so that is what my faith dictates. That's what morality dictates. That's what virtue dictates, that I'm going to treat you with love and respect, not because you can do anything for me or can't do anything for me, not because I think I'm better than you or I think you're better than me. None of those things come into a play. The reason that people deserve love, dignity, and respect is because they're made in the image of God. And I want to value your humanity first, right? You are a human being made in God's image, so I'm going to love you and treat you with respect. Now, secondarily, now you're going to be, or should be, treated a certain way based on your behavior, your character, and how you carry yourself, right? In our culture, we've gotten to a place where we give a pass for people for bad behavior. We justify bad behavior. And what happens is when a person is a bad actor, when they have bad behaviors and they don't operate within the lines, then we make excuses for them, right? They want to be the victim, because I seen a person, I saw a story years ago. I had a conversation with a person, this guy down in Georgia years ago. He was going to jail. He got loose. He shot a judge and a police officer, I believe. And so they finally captured him and put him back in jail. And somebody described this person as a thug. And I said, I agree, this person's a thug. They need to go to jail for a long time. And as I was having a conversation with the person started making justifications. Well, you don't know where he came from. You don't know what his life experience is. You don't know. See, that's not only making excuses and not holding people accountable, but it is the victimhood that they're trying to instill in people, especially people of color. Because he had a bad childhood, we should excuse him for shooting a judge and killing a police officer. And I believe he was going to jail because he had raped somebody. And so at some point in time, we have to understand that although I'm going to treat you with love, respect as a human being, you also have to be held accountable for the choices and the behaviors that you make. And that's really what our Constitution dictates, that a moral and religious people don't really need laws, but because not everybody is moral and religious, that you have to have laws and that dictate consequences when we don't operate within the proper behaviors. And so I just want to encourage you today and understand our history. Like I said, true history is truth. We have to speak truth, but we also have to acknowledge how far we've come as a nation. And the reason we were able to come so far as a nation is because of this great thing called the Constitution that we put in place that helps to govern the affairs of men and restrict the government. And the only time we need government is when we don't play by the rules. Anyway, bless you. Stay tuned for the next one. I love you. Be blessed in Jesus' name. Bye-bye.